Could you imagine what it'd be like if God answered every one of our prayers? I'm glad that he doesn't. My life would be an absolute mess if he answered all my prayers. Nevertheless, when we have unanswered prayer, it can cause a lot of confusion and even frustration. So it's along that line that I want to talk today on Daily Renewal about why isn't God answering my prayers? Hello everybody, this is Pastor Lyle and welcome to Daily Renewal. If this is your first time tuning in with us, I just want to ask you to consider becoming a subscriber to our channel, hitting that like button below and ringing that bell, and that will give you access to over 100 different episodes of Daily Renewal that are all designed to help you in your Christian walk. Now today I want to start out with a question. If God wanted you to give you more than you are asking, would you want what you are asking for, or would you want what God wanted to give you? Now, this is a really important question in times like we're going through right now, because there's a lot of times where I think when we go through some of the things that 2020 has handed out, there's a lot of people that are praying for different results. They're asking for God to do things, and often what you may find is that you may run into situations where you think, you know what, I don't know if God is answering my prayers. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about that today, because when you have times in your life where it feels like God is not answering, it could very well be that God has something in store, and we just have to be awake and be watchful to see what God is going to do. Because very often we will find out that God, because he knows everything, he knows the beginning, the end, and he knows exactly where we're at. It's often that God has a plan for us that is way better than some of the plans that we have for ourselves. In Ephesians 3, for example, we need to keep this in mind. In Ephesians 3:20, it talks about the fact that now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, to him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen. This is a reminder here that God's ways are so much bigger than ours. The fact that he is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or think. And you might be thinking, well, I can think pretty big. I've got big plans. I got big dreams. I got big visions. And, to have all those, as long as they're lining up with God, that's all great. But we have to remember that God's plans, God's dreams, and God's visions for his church and for you are bigger than what we could even fathom. He's got deeper dimensions in regards to the thoughts that he has for us and for his church, for his people, than we could ever think of. So it's with that I want to look at the whole idea of how we handle when maybe some of the things that we have requested have not turned out in either the time period that we hoped they would, or if it just doesn't seem that God is maybe listening to our prayers. Are our prayers really being answered? Because what happens is, if you're in situations where you feel like maybe God isn't hearing your prayers, that can cause a lot of problems. That can cause some distancing in your walk with God. And we're going to go through reading a really amazing story in the Bible today about what looked to be unanswered prayer, when really what it was is that it was God that was setting someone up for something that was far greater than what they were asking for. So we're going to start off today by looking at a passage in the book of John, and this is often referred to as the story of Lazzarus. Lazarus was talked about a few times in the New Testament, but his claim to fame was that Lazarus was the guy that Jesus rose from the dead. And Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. His family was, in fact. He had two sisters that we know of, Mary and Martha. And we see here that there was a situation where Lazarus was sick, And there was a calling out from the two sisters to let Jesus know, because Jesus wasn't in the city at the time. So we pick up the story in chapter 11, verse 1. It says, "Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. And when Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was." Now, at first glance, this looks like a little bit of a friendship where maybe one of the friends isn't taking this very serious. And it's the Jesus part of the friendship. We see here that Lazarus is sick, and they've seen many miracles. And the two sisters believed that Jesus could heal Lazarus at any time. They had seen Jesus perform many miracles. And so they call for Jesus, and Jesus, who's in another place, he says, you know what? This isn't a sickness unto death. But you can hear the desperation in the voices of the sisters. It was a serious situation. As you're about to see, it got even more serious. But Jesus' response was something that I think needs to be looked at here. And that response was that after he heard that he was sick, he actually stayed in the place that he was 2 more days. Now, when we look at a situation like this, I know if I had friends that were in trouble, especially if I knew that there was something I could do, if one of my friends was sick unto death, or I thought that they were, if a friend of mine was saying, hey, can you come? I know myself, I think I would probably try to drop everything I had. I would try to rearrange my schedules, and I would immediately get there as soon as I possibly could. But Jesus here, every indication is that Jesus just kept on doing what he was doing, and it took him 2 extra days before he decided to go see his dying friend Lazarus. And I can only imagine what was going through the heads of the 2 sisters especially, and possibly even Lazarus. And we're going to get into that here in just a few more moments. Now, if we keep reading the story, we see that Jesus goes on from there and he begins to talk to the disciples about some things. And then we pick this up in verse 11. It says, "These things he said, after he said to them, he says, Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go, that I may wake him up. And the disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. And however, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about him taking rest in sleep. And then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad. Now it goes on to say, I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. But I put it that way in particular because I wanted to show that, again, as Jesus is sitting here talking to his disciples, this seems odd. He tells them, he's going to sleep, and then they go, if he's sleeping, it's going to be a good thing. But Jesus says to him, he says, no, look, he's not actually sleeping as in a physical form. No, he's dead, and I'm glad he's dead. Well, why would he say what kind of a friend would be glad that his friend died? Now, we're going to probably cover this a little bit more in just a bit as to why he was glad. But I want to establish here that Jesus was able to see beyond the current situation, and Jesus knew that there was something good that was going to come out of this. And as I look at a lot of the situations that we're going through right now in 2020, and I know there's a lot of people that are wondering, and I cover this often in Daily Renewal. I see a lot of people, I hear it from a lot of people say, you know what, I don't understand what God is doing here. Well, in this particular story, I can tell you right now, there was a lot of people that wouldn't have understood what Jesus was doing here. I mean, his friend's dying, he's the one that can heal him, and he seems to be taking his time. And in fact, in speaking to the disciples, he says that I'm glad that Lazarus is dead. This makes no sense to the natural mind, but we have to always keep in mind that God knows exactly what's going on. And in your situation, in my situation, as we've talked about before, all of these tribulations, all these trials, all these adjustments that we're having to make in our life right now, Jesus has already seen them, and he's glad they're going on. Let's not forget that all of these things that are happening, as a pastor, a lot of the places are going through the fact that you can't have a certain amount of people in your building. You can only have 50 in most places, and it's affected how people can go to church, how people can worship. It's just thrown a wrench into everything. And you know what? Jesus is glad. He's glad that we can't do things the way that we used to do. He's glad that the comfortable church that we've gone to for so many years, that we can no longer do it the way that it was supposed to be. And as upset as we can get with the government, as upset as we can get with anybody that we want to get mad about, the bottom line is Jesus is glad. And the reason he's glad is because he sees beyond this, and he knows that there's something better that is going to come out of this. It could be that you're going through financial struggle, health struggle. I mean, I've shared with you some of the things that I've even had to go through with myself over the past couple years. And when you're in the middle of a struggle, and you're saying, God, I don't understand why I'm here. This doesn't make any sense. And you pray, and if you need healing, you're praying healing scriptures. If you're having trouble with finances, you're doing everything you can to access finance, or to walk out financial principles. Those things are all good, and the Lord wants us to get our lives right. When things aren't going the way we want, it does often cause us to look at how we're walking and make adjustments. And we should do those things. If we have sin in our life, yes, that can affect things in your life. And so when things are tough, it causes us to look at some of those things and maybe reassess and adjust our lifestyle. But that being the case, there is times where it's not about that. It is simply this, that God has something better for us, but there's things that need to happen in order for those things to be released, in order for us to experience the better thing. So we see here that there was a request made by the sisters, and Jesus didn't seem to answer it, especially in the time period where they felt they needed the answer. And I'd say the idea of the fact that Lazarus died, in all natural sense, it would look like Jesus missed it. Like Jesus, we know you could have come through, but you didn't come through on the timeline. I mean, he died. Lazarus died. So, did Jesus miss it here? Well, so as we go on in this story, Jesus comes in, and we see, picking up in verse 17, and so when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb for 4 days, talking about Lazarus. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Now, Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went out to meet him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give it to you. Now, I want to point out something very interesting about this story. Now, if the names Mary and Martha are familiar to you, it may be because I know in past daily renewals, we've looked at the idea or the story of them in Luke 10, verses 38 to 42. It's the story of Mary and Martha. There was a day where Jesus came to their house, and Martha was busy getting things ready and working around the house. But Mary, she sat at Jesus' feet. And Martha was upset with Mary, and she said, Lord, I'm paraphrasing. She said, Lord, can you get my sister to come help me? And Jesus said, Martha, you got your mind on so many things, but Mary's the one that's actually chosen the good part. And the good part is that Mary understood that being at Jesus' feet was the most important. It was the best thing you could do. So on that day, Mary was the one who understood. Mary was the one who was at his feet. And we also see it was related earlier. She's the one who anointed him and wiped. You saw this in verse 2. She anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. I mean, Mary seemed to have a deeper relationship with Jesus. But then when Jesus comes to town and the girls hear he's at a certain place, it's Martha who comes and greets Jesus. And Mary stays at home. What would that all be about, I wonder? You know, as I look at this story, the one thing that the two girls said to Jesus, the first thing they said, both of them, and we'll read about Mary in just a minute, but the first thing that Martha said, she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. You know, that's the question. Why weren't you here? You know, and she had faith to believe that Jesus could still do miracles and you know, but her headspace was in a totally different place than Mary. She was just, even though she questioned why Jesus wasn't there, she still understood, you know what? Jesus, I may not understand why this all happened, but I know who you are. And because of that, I still want to be with you. It doesn't make sense. And you know what? When we don't have answered prayer in the time period that we want it answered, the best thing we can do is whenever God is trying to get us to respond, even when nothing's making sense, we need to do what Martha did, and that is respond. She had questions. She didn't know what this was about, but she still responded. But then, when we look at the story of Mary, this is what we need to be careful about. And we pick up the story, a little bit later in the story, in verse 28. We see here, and after Jesus had talked with Martha, he says, and when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, the teacher has come and is calling for you. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. And now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. And then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out and followed her, saying, she's going to the tomb to weep there. And then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, you can see here that both the sisters questioned him. It was this statement that, you know what, Lord, we believe that if you were here, that you could have healed our brother. What was happening here with Mary? I really believe that what happened here with Mary is that Mary was offended that Jesus didn't come and heal her brother. You know, they sent out the invitation saying this is important, and he waits 2 days to come. Here's somebody who has shown her devotion. Again, she was the one who anointed his feet. She was the one who stayed at his feet when everybody else was when her sister was sidetracked. She's proven herself to be loyal. She's somebody who really has believed on Jesus. She considers herself to be close to Jesus. And yet when she needed something from him, where was he? That's what I see happening with her. And that's what I also see happens a lot of the time with us. You know, we do our best to go to church. We do our best to be faithful and loyal and do the things right. But then we're always going to be in places in our walk with God where we're going to be challenged on why we serve him. Are we serving him because of who he is? Or are we serving him for what he will do for us? And, you know, the great part about this is that God was planning on doing something in this situation. It was greater than what the two sisters had originally asked. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. But what I want to establish here is that for us, We can't afford to get offended with God. And Jesus here, he wept about the fact that this stuff had happened, and that in fact, in verse 33 says, therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in his spirit and was troubled. It bothers the Lord when he sees that we are struggling. And she was struggling here, but a lot of her struggle, she was not only struggling with the death of her brother, but she was struggling with the fact that she didn't understand why the request that she had of Jesus, why he didn't come on time to grant her request. She had questions about him. And it's from there that we see that this story takes off in a totally different direction. And this is what I wanted to show you today. If you're in a position where you're kind of wondering, Lord, I don't understand why things are going the way they're going. I've prayed, I've been faithful, I've done everything I know to do, and yet you seem to be doing things the exact opposite direction. Do you even care about my requests? I think anybody that's been a Christian any length of time, you've probably been in situations like this. I know I've been in situations like this, and I know I'll be in many situations just like this again, because all of these things are often used by God to help remind us, number one, that we need to check our own motives when it comes to even the things we ask for. Can we trust in the fact, and I often talk about Romans 8:28, the fact that all things work toward the good for those who love God and are the called according to his purpose. As we're about to see here, this particular story wasn't an answer to prayer. But what it was an answer that was way better. It far exceeded the actual request that the two sisters made. And we see this as we look reading from verse 38. It says, then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. And Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? And then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was laying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now, when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth! And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. Now, when you see this story now, my question comes, again, when it comes down to, was it better if he would have answered their prayer to heal Lazarus? Or was it better that he actually raised Lazarus from the dead? Now, the idea of him healing Lazarus, that would have been great. That would have been a great answer to prayer. But as a result of him actually raising Lazarus from the dead, there's two major things that we see here that were affected in a greater way. Number one, Jesus was able to reveal himself in a deeper way to both Mary and Martha than what they had even been able to conceive up until this point. Yes, they knew that he was a healer, but they were able to see a deeper dimension of who Jesus was because of this miracle. And the second thing that we see is not only did the raising of Lazarus affect the family, but as a result, all of Israel, those who didn't like Jesus, those who liked Jesus, those who were maybe on the fence about Jesus, they were able to witness a miracle that would not have been able to even happen if the request to heal him would have been granted in the first place. So we see, not only did it affect the individuals who are asking in a greater way by going above and beyond what they asked, but all of Israel, all the people around were able to benefit from an amazing miracle by God. What's that got to do with you? See, as I look at some of the things that we're going through right now, again, I'm very excited about the times we're in. I'm excited because I believe that God is making a major adjustment in what we call the church world. There's a lot of things that we're not able to do the way we used to do, and a lot of those things, when we read the Bible, they were things that sometimes were orchestrated, and if they weren't orchestrated by man, they were adjusted so that we could be comfortable. Adjusted, like I said, maybe biblical principles that we got our hands involved with. When I say our hands, man's hands. Why do I say that? Or what do I mean by that? I've been reading a lot, especially in the New Testament, about what the church really is supposed to be about. And as I look at a lot of the things that the church in the past 10, 20 years or longer, there's a lot of things that the church seemed to have got sidetracked about. There seems to be in a lot of places, maybe emphasis on money. And does the Bible talk about money? Absolutely. There's a lot of talk about how we should deal with our finances if we're believers. But there's things about, that I think that we were to examine. There's financial abuses. There's things, different emphasis that were in the church world that as of right now, a lot of those things are being stripped away. So it's getting back to what this is really about. It's about loving God and loving people, and how to walk that out in a proper way without a lot of the exterior things that maybe we've added on to what we call church. So as I look at what's going on, the fact that the people of God are not comfortable, it causes us to relook at what this is all about. And from there, it's also putting us in a position where we get to analyze our own lives and see for ourselves what God is about to do. See, God hasn't forgotten about us. He hasn't forgotten about you as an individual, and he hasn't forgotten about his church. In fact, every indication is that he's trying to clean up the church. He's trying to bring forth a church without spot or wrinkle. With that, when we look at some of the things that we pray right now, if you're not getting answers to prayer, if it's one thing I want you to get out of today, is that we can believe, and we need to look at this, is that maybe some of the prayers that we're asking really aren't God's best. Could it be that some of the prayers that we don't seem to be having answered right now is because God is saying, look, I hear your request, you're not going to get it, and I'm glad, because if I was to answer your prayer, you would not get everything that I'm about to unfold that is greater than what you can ever ask or think. I really believe that God is positioning all of us into places individually and corporately as his church. He's positioning us for things that are beyond what we can ask or think. But we cannot get disappointed. We cannot get offended. This is not a time to shrink back and say, well, you know what? I don't know if God really cares. No, right now is the time to say, Lord, you know what? If my prayers aren't answered, I'm totally fine with that, because I understand that if things aren't being answered, it's either because of the timing that you have that maybe doesn't line up with what I want, or because you have something bigger planned that maybe I don't understand yet, because it's beyond my capability of understanding. And you might say, well, why would God do that? Well, when I look at, and I often use the illustration of a parent and a child, a 6-year-old child has all the capabilities as far as the physical faculties, if you will, to be able to drive a car. They've got arms and legs, and they might not be able to reach the gas pedal. But I've seen stories on the news where kids that age went for a joyride and only to be arrested later. I remember reading something about that about 6 months ago about a kid taking a joyride. So I say that to say this: a 6-year-old can drive a car, physically capable of driving a car. Yet nobody in their right mind would think that it's smart to let a 6-year-old take your brand new car out onto the highway. Why? because a 6-year-old is not capable of doing that. They're physically capable, but there isn't enough information, there isn't enough maturity, they're just plain and simply not ready to be given the responsibility to drive a car. And for us, when we look at the idea of God and man, we have to understand that we are not on the same intellectual plane as God. God is so far beyond us. He's like a dad to a child. He knows way more than we do, and we're just not where he is. And so from that, he knows what the limitation of his kids are. And so as we continue to mature, God will release what needs to be released. He'll guide us where we need to go. But you have to remember that God's idea is the best for his children. He has the best in store for us. So we just have to trust that God knows what he's doing, and he knows the timing of what it needs to be done, and he knows any adjustments that need to be done along the way in order to get us to the place we need to be. And I'll leave you, my last thought on this is the fact that also what we have to keep in mind is the things that God is doing in our lives are not just to prepare us for the things at this time and space or the things of this world. God is doing things in our lives because he's preparing us for an eternity with him. A lot of the things that happen in our lives, we have to see beyond here. When we look at the book of Hebrews, for example, in the book of Hebrews chapter 11, Paul talks about this in verse 35. He's talking to a church that's being persecuted, and he's talking about the former heroes of the faith, and he says this. He says, women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. So we have people here that are talking about the fact that, and when we look at the idea of life and death, getting healed, this idea with Lazzarus being raised from the dead, that's a great thing. But, if you were to be able to speak to Lazarus right now, he would say that the place that he is in right now is better than any time that he had here on earth. We have to understand that there was people in the days of old that understood that there was life beyond here. And so everything that we do, we have to keep in mind that God is looking at our lives, even what's going to happen beyond here, and he's preparing us for that as well. So we need to have our eyes firmly fixed on the fact that Jesus is the one that leads us, and he's going to lead you the way that is best for us. Well, I hope you're encouraged by that today. If you are, again, I just want to encourage you to become a subscriber to our channel, hitting the like button. You can also look for us on Facebook, and we just continue to try to encourage you. Share these videos with as many people as you think that they're going to be helpful to. So having said that, I'm looking forward to the next episode of Daily Renewal. But until then, God bless you, and have a great day.